make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to episode 52 of Polite Conversations podcast. Somewhere out there, free speech warriors are probably flagging this content as we speak. So if you like what I do and want it to grow and thrive and survive, please consider supporting the show via patreon.com/nice mangoes. And of course, a shout out to all the patrons who make this show possible. You guys are the very best. And now, on to the episode. I'm here today with Matthew Sears, Professor of Classics at the University of New Brunswick. We'll be talking about Orientalism, specifically in Disney's Aladdin, and I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff too. Matthew, thanks so much for joining me today. How's it going?
It's going very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been following you for a while on Twitter, and I have to say I really appreciate your criticisms of Quillette and the IDW.
Right. Well, it gets a little wild out there sometimes, but I mean, someone's got to call these people to account, and Quillette just makes it so darn easy.
Believe me, I get so much hate for the same, especially because I'm an ex-Muslim who grew up in Saudi Arabia and could have been such a useful tool for that whole narrative, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there are others or at least that claim a similar background to yours who they do parade out as kind of mascots.
Yep.
And I face a lot of hate from that kind of crowd. I don't think nearly the kind of level that women, and especially women of color, get. But just because I'm a white guy that studies the classics, I'm supposed to be one of them, right?
You should have been like Peterson's favorite guy, right?
Right, and I should be an alpha lobster of some kind, and the fact that I'm not, it really seems to tick them off.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I'm glad you're out there doing what you do, and more people need to do it, because really, I don't understand how people don't see this. That these people with their academic veneer and prize of credibility, they are so dangerous with what they're pushing with their race science and.
Well, it's true. I mean, they're claiming the prestige that scientific and other academic fields have for their messages, and it doesn't matter to the general public too often that they don't actually represent these fields well or even know what they're talking about. But the fact that, Peterson can claim to be a full professor at the University of Toronto means he automatically gets more credibility than he should have, because he really doesn't know what he's talking about. And it's really annoying from being inside the academy and seeing people use their positions this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you tweeted something on Orientalism the other day. It's something that I think about on and off quite a bit. I have so many things to say about it,
Oh, it's a huge topic for sure.
Yeah, so it really fascinated me to read your thread on it. I'll link it in the show notes. And you said, my favorite go-to example of racist iconography in pop culture that most people have no clue is racist is Disney's Aladdin. Just look at those adorable kids. And then you went on to provide some examples.
Right.
So, yeah, I thought we could talk about it a bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I should start off by saying, as your listeners will probably know, I'm not by any means the first person to flag these problems with Aladdin. And, I mean, when it came out in the 90s, it was a huge controversy. I mean, there were New York Times articles about it. Arab American groups lodged formal complaints and actually had the words of the opening song changed for the video release.
Right. Let me just read the lyrics. I have them here. Oh, I come from a land from a faraway place where the caravan camels roam, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
Right. And now, I mean, I saw it in theaters as a kid.
Yeah.
And of course loved it, as every kid did.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, I didn't have access to theaters because those were banned in Saudi.
Well,
but.
I was in Vancouver where there were theaters. But, my parents loved it because of Robin Williams and everything else. And but on the video release, it now is a markedly different voice for that one line about cutting off your ear. And it's now, I think, where it's flat and immense and the heat is intense or something, and then it goes back to the original voice. It's really like a cut and paste job. So Aladdin from the beginning had some controversy around it, but it kind of has still managed to remain as one of the great sort of canonical Disney movies, and very few people recognize or feel that it's problematic today.
And that's just the thing, right? Like, it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. Like, you don't have to hate Aladdin to recognize that it has some issues in this way. And,
right.
You don't have to, like, completely destroy, your whole childhood over it and be like, oh my God, Aladdin is so problematic. Like, I can't think back to the days I liked it fondly. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I love Aladdin. I still do.
Absolutely.
And I laugh at some of the jokes. Movie. Yeah. But I do recognize that there are some issues. And I think even as a kid, like, some of it felt kind of off to me, but I still loved it. Like, we were so desperate and starved for representation, like in mainstream children's books and movies. There was no such thing that pointed to anything remotely similar to what we were experiencing, that we were happy to even embrace caricatures.
And that's, I think, I'm glad you bring these issues up because, along with you, I try to take a nuanced approach to things. And I realize that there's a lot of literature, a lot of cinema, a lot of art that I actually do like on many levels, and a lot of artists and writers that are problematic. And we can identify and talk about those things without becoming some kind of Puritan and deciding that these things need to be, banned or something like this. But, people, when I point out that there are racist elements and stereotypes in Aladdin that might be harmful, the automatic response is, from so many people is that, why can't you enjoy anything? And why do you have to ruin everything for everybody else? And the thing is, I watch comedians all the time that and a lot of the jokes make me cringe, and sometimes that's what they're supposed to do. But I'm not throwing everything out when I call for people and try to point out that these things are there. And I'm also glad you brought up the idea that, from the perspective of someone who was growing up in an Arab context, that having any representation of Arabs and Arabia on the movie screen, even if it's problematic, it's complicated because in some ways it might be better than no representation at all. And in other ways it might be worse, but it's not just a black and white thing. Right,
exactly. And I think a similar thing has happened recently with Apu from The Simpsons, right?
Yes.
And my background is South Asian, Pakistani, even though I was raised in Saudi Arabia, so I kind of relate to both things.
Right.
And, Apu has made me cringe a lot of times, and sometimes it just seems like, some white dude is making fun of my dad, basically.
Right. And it's Hank Azaria, right? So he's a white dude, yeah.
Yeah. It would be completely different, I think, if it wasn't. But I also love Apu and love The Simpsons and have laughed at many of the jokes and have also been delighted by having some sort of representation in the early days. So it's not as simple as, you hate The Simpsons or you love The Simpsons or Aladdin is problematic or it's not. It's a combination of complicated feelings, and I think there's no harm in acknowledging that, and it always comes from looking back at the past as we evolve, right?
Sure. We can change our views on certain things, and that could be healthy to sort of look back and think, well, I used to think this was uncomplicated, but now I see that it is a little complicated, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And The Simpsons, though, is I would say, less racist than Disney for a lot of reasons. Disney has a host of problematic things. But, I think for the 90s, they were doing pretty well. They did have a white person voicing a stereotypical, Indian convenience store owner. But at the same time, whenever they brought up stereotypes of India or Indians, they usually did it to sort of highlight the ignorance and buffoonery of the white characters in the show, who didn't understand Apu and his culture. So they were trying to say,
sometimes it was just not that.
Right.
Like Apu strapping on, 8 milk bottles to his chest to feed all his.
Well, sometimes it's just ridiculous stuff like
right.
that.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, it's interesting to me that I guess conservatives get so protective about this stuff. Right? Like even when I speak to Pakistani conservatives, I've seen them get really mad at local feminists who will point out that, these nursery rhymes and fairy tales and things are of the past, and we've evolved beyond that, and we should change these things. I think I said something about the nursery rhyme, sugar and spice and everything nice.
Oh, yes, right. This
And so these Pakistani Islamic right-wingers got so mad at me for saying that. And it's just so reminiscent of that to me. I get to see both parts of the world, and they're conservatives who supposedly hate each other, but are so similar in so many ways.
I think that's part, I think it's endemic to conservatism.
Yeah.
Even though the word conservatism means you're trying to conserve things, just on the most basic level. And I think they see, if people like us point out that some of these things that you've grown up with or that have been a part of our culture for so long or might actually need a rethought or a rethinking, they think we're just eliminating things. And I think they see it as their job to conserve those sometimes. I think that's the natural. If you really want to get down to basic, even personality traits, the natural inclination to kind of keep things versus the natural inclination to kind of push against things that are there.
But then I don't understand why they dislike Islamic conservatives so much for just wanting that in a stronger way, It's their inclination.
Cultural conservatism and religious conservatism are probably much more related than they would like to admit.
Yeah, but they'll point at the non-Western cultural conservatism, even outside of religion. It's usually tied to religion, but...
indirectly at least.
Yeah, but they'll be like, their culture is inferior. But they really just want similar things, right? They are down with the anti-feminism, they're now starting to adopt the anti-SJW language. I've seen Islamists who are Peterson fans, and it's frightening. I've seen Islamic MRAs and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it makes them strange bedfellows. And I think at the end of the day, if someone becomes prominent like Peterson, for essentially making arguments for, quote, traditional family structures and gender roles, then everybody from every corner of the internet and corner of the globe who wants to fight for that kind of vision of society is going to embrace the other one, even if on the surface they probably should hate each other,
right?
Because Peterson's going to be posting lots of stuff against what he sees as Islamism, while he's also saying that these essentially compatible with Islamism views of the family should be the way things are. Yeah. It's bizarre.
It is bizarre, and in a way they do hate each other, but in a way they also love each other, and there's so many confusing alliances right now in this political world that we live in today.
It is. Before we get back to Orientalism, I keep thinking of the fact. One of the most bizarre things I keep seeing is all of these conservatives in Canada and the United States all of a sudden discovering that they're pro women's rights and pro religious freedom when when you can whine about Muslims.
Yeah.
All of a sudden pro LGBTQ rights. The same people I think Barbara Kay.
Yeah.
Who write columns about gays trying to kidnap your children and force them to be gay.
And trans people being body snatchers
But all of a sudden they're these gay rights champions because it's convenient for bashing Islam over the head. It's just it's absurd.
Right. And women's rights champions, these selective we care about women's rights when it comes to the Middle East, but really hate feminists when it comes to the West. I actually had a couple of Saudi feminists on my show last year where they talked about this being used as pawns by Western anti-feminists and how much they hate it, and how they've had to keep track, basically, of the sort of skeptosphere, this like IDW. It didn't have that term yet, but this whole group, like they know, like women in Saudi Arabia know who Dave Rubin is, know who Milo Yiannopoulos is. I guess very online women, but they know, and because they've had to familiarize themselves with the people who use them as pawns.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of people now are using one of the classic troll avatars now on Twitter is that icon of the woman taking her hijab off in Iran.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you see that now, instead of seeing it as this sign of solidarity with this women's movement in Iran, it's almost always now a sign of a right-wing Peterson troll.
Yeah.
And it's absurd. Again, I just keep coming back to that word, but it's these diametric opposites are just using any political symbol they can get their hands on to try to gain a leg up on the tyrants like me, who actually think women's rights are also something that people are trying to stifle in Canada.
Right.
And we should probably call them on it.
But if it's not Sharia, then it's not worth opposing. But yeah, and it's painful for me to see, as an ex-Muslim who actually does want to push back against religious conservatism and, the Islamic right, to see the term ex-Muslim being used in that way too. Usually if you see ex-Muslim ally or someone who just obsesses and fetishizes ex-Muslims in their social media bios, they are not like people who care about minorities within minorities in Muslim communities. They are people who just want to have a convenient tool to bash Islam with.
Right. And it's the ultimate sort of whataboutism.
Yeah. You can't be like, an ally to ex-Muslims and be super, super anti-immigrant. Like, what would you want all these ex-Muslims that you hope are created? What do you want them to do? Like, if you're super anti-immigrant, you'll not allow them to come here and search for a better, more free of religion life, then you're not a very good ally.
Right. I would agree.
Yeah. So back to Orientalism, though.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't think it's just a fluke that we can kind of go off on these conversational tangents when talking about Orientalism, because I think it's a phenomenon that ties into all of these issues. Because ultimately, these allies of ex-Muslims and so on that we're talking about see these people from traditionally Muslim countries as kind of mascots, and I think that's at the heart of Orientalism is this simplification of what really amounts to hundreds of millions of people, dozens of countries, dozens of language groups. And even within Islam itself, even people who are religiously observant Muslims, just dozens of different strains and forms, and what Orientalism does is it smooths that all over and makes that whole imagined part of the world just this one uniform, undifferentiated, and like kind of idealized and romanticized or vilified, fantasy world, really.
But don't you think that comes a bit from both the left and the right? Like the left, I guess, in a well-meaning way, but they do tend to do it like glamorize burqas and.
Well, it's this. I mean, Orientalism, and so. As many people will know, I mean, this term was coined by Edward Said in 1978 in his book called Orientalism. Said would call out the left and the right equally. Mm-hmm. This is not a conservative or liberal phenomenon. And in fact, as Said would point out, that some of the worst Orientalizers around were the people that were, the professors of like Middle Eastern studies, or like the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. So it was the people that were supposed to be most sympathetic with and most concerned with representing and speaking on behalf of things like the Middle Eastern world, for example, that were sometimes the guiltiest in perpetuating these stereotypes and presenting an inaccurate and oversimplified picture of the quote East. So Said was perfectly happy to point that out, and so I found myself in that kind of awkward space. I started this kind of public persona that I now have a year ago exactly.
How does that work out with your university, by the way?
Oh, it's fine.
Okay.
When you see university professors in the news, we won't name names in this podcast, but getting in trouble for their free speech quote, they're actually getting in trouble because they're jerks that are bad at their job. And so I have received nothing but support and from my colleagues. It's completely fine. I mean, I imagine that the people that work in the communications office who are constantly having to deal with people tagging UNB. They're mad at me thinking that I'm going to get fired. I mean, they probably roll their eyes when they have to go through and just ignore all those tweets. But no, there's no sense that I'm not doing my job as a professor and engaging this way. And so my first public article was in the Ottawa Citizen, and it was about the proposed face covering ban in Quebec. And I just compared it to the way that the ancient Romans persecuted the Christians, and every time something bad happened to Rome, there was a flood or there was a famine or something, they would just blame the Christians. And so if this was just the same thing happening in Quebec, where, if the peak or the Liberal Party is not doing as well as it wants to in the polls, or the economy is not doing as well, let's just talk about a face covering ban, which is just a way to stigmatize, obviously, observant Muslims that use the face cover. So I found myself writing an article against this ban, but that led everybody to sort of be like, you're pro subjection of women, and you're on that difficult to navigate tightrope where I don't want to come out and be like, isn't the niqab wonderful? I mean,
but many people do that.
I mean, so as a person, I don't like the niqab in the sense that, I'm, a secularist and don't think that anybody should feel like they need to cover themselves in public. And I don't, and women in my family don't. But at the same time, I'm against using the face covering as a way to stigmatize a group of people and legislating against it in a way that's just going to mean that people who may or may not be already oppressed in certain ways are now no longer able to take the bus. But a lot of people, you're right, they do kind of romanticize these other cultures in ways that I also think are stereotyping and not helpful for coming up with any kind of solution or better understanding of groups of people.
Yeah, like this niqab issue, I'm a very vocal critic of the niqab, but I don't believe in, blanket bans on this kind of thing. And it's amusing to me how many so-called free speech warriors and libertarian types are totally down with controlling what people wear, right? Like, I think banning it in places like the bus or whatever would just encourage already what's like violent attacks and hate and stuff that visibly Muslim women do get on public transport and things like that. Now, it is like a tightrope to kind of navigate this subject, because I'm very, very vocally opposed to the niqabs as someone who grew up in Saudi Arabia, had to deal with morality police, was forced by the
Absolutely.
state,
Yes.
and I've seen my mom be threatened with a morality police's cane just because her headscarf slipped. So I really dislike it being glamorized or downplayed or called feminist. I understand the urge to sort of show solidarity with Muslim minority women, especially in this really anti-Muslim environment. And I, want to do the same. But at the same time, I want this space to also push back internally among my community's right-wing ideas.
And this is a conversation that people can and should have, and especially people who come from a context in which there are people in the community with face coverings, like yourself, that you're talking about. I mean, you can have reform movements within cultures, these conversations are important and should be encouraged.
Yeah.
But this just isn't a role for the state, and it's certainly not the biggest problem I have with these legislative movements, and when you see them in Europe as well, is that it's so clearly just cynical.
Yeah.
And it's so clearly just an attempt to drum up some kind of base support.
Yeah.
And nobody in Quebec actually cares about who's proposing these laws, actually cares about women's lib.
Yeah.
It's just we need more votes from these Lemute fools. And so we're going to try to stigmatize people. And so and I'm glad, it is a complicated thing, because to fight back against that, you do run the risk of glamorizing things that in ways that aren't helpful.
It's hard. And even when someone like me were to speak up in a very nuanced way, we'd be called I don't know, UKIPers or racist. And it's well, no, can you not see the difference of a woman who's gone through this before, who's just speaking out, and someone who's using this as an issue to stigmatize visibly Muslim women? And when it comes to places like airport security or banks or, courtrooms, there are reasonable things for the state to do, I think. There was that issue in the last election where a woman from Mississauga didn't want to show her face in court.
So she did it in a private, this is the citizenship ceremony.
Yeah.
She did it in a private room in front of the official. Instead of in the public space.
Yeah, but the articles surrounding her were really painful for women in my situation to see. This is a feminist thing, and this is actually liberating, and it's so strange for me to all of a sudden be so in opposition to the left on everything that they're saying, all of a sudden when we agree on everything otherwise. It was a weird time,
And I can't imagine, coming from, I'm not dealing with that background myself or with family members in that situation. I deal with my own baggage and the fact that I come from an evangelical conservative Christian background, and that has its own thing, as we're witnessing today in Washington. But it's the idea, I think, that we all have to be always thoughtful, and it's we can have allies and we can have general positions that we take and fight for strongly, but we still should be free to consider things with nuance, and we might not agree with a certain political side or a certain social side on everything, and deviating from that in a certain situation shouldn't automatically lead to some kind of backlash.
Right, and this I find is a form of modern Orientalism too. CBC, our national broadcaster, aired this documentary recently about Muslim kids transitioning from an Islamic school to regular public school.
Okay.
And they portrayed it in this way. I know people that have actually pulled their kids out to put them in these religious schools, and it is not a very healthy experience. And there could have been something more nuance talked about, but they just portrayed this whole thing as, these poor families are experiencing this trouble of not being able to assimilate and, not being able to fit in. I don't like the word assimilate, but when it's so much more than that. It's not just the racists that are a problem in that context, right? It's also the parents who are segregating their children, and they're depicting that this is what Muslims are in Canada is so harmful, especially when we're fighting for like a more nuanced representation in the media to show that only conservative, very, very, very conservative Muslims are Muslims, as often CBC does, but they don't show like the trans Muslims, the gay Muslims, the progressive Muslims. It's always this caricature, this, one-dimensional conservative equals Muslim. And that's just not true.
And that is that is a facet of Orientalism, this idea that it's one undifferentiated community. And I'm glad you sent to me the children's book that you wrote about Eid.
Eid, yeah.
Eid,
the holiday.
Because it's kind of like the anti-Orientalist book, because what it does, first of all the drawings are of, and people, when they think of Muslim, they think of a particular kind of Arab. Mm-hmm. Right. But that you drew, the fact that the largest Muslim country is, Indonesia, and like the second largest is India, right? And then Pakistan, South in South and Southeast Asia. And so you drew all of these different kinds of Muslim dress and people from different parts of the world. And you highlight the fact that you can celebrate Eid, very religiously or not religiously, just like people celebrate Christmas.
Right.
And, nobody seems to think that if you have a Christmas tree, you're some kind of Bible thumper. and so I think more of more resources and cultural products like that emphasize that you can, be culturally Muslim and in many ways, and be gay, or and not be Arab, for example, or you can be a conservative Muslim from an Arab country. Just like we just take for granted that our society celebrates, as I said, Christmas, where a relatively small percentage of those that have Christmas trees are actually going to be really into the incarnation of the Son of God's part of it. They're going to be more into the elf on the shelf part of it.
Right. Yes, and I wish there were more resources like that for Muslim kids from different types of families, different denominations, but there just aren't. And I got a lot of anger for this book from all over. Religious Muslims didn't like it because I said you can not go to the mosque and you can just go for a picnic instead.
Right.
And that was not appreciated. And then other people said that it was Orientalist because, of course, I had this background of like minarets and things like that. So
it is a Muslim holiday. It's no weirder than a background of a Christmas tree or something for a that's strange.
Right. So I wanted to ask you what differentiates, I guess, an internal sort of romanticism of something like that in a children's book where I put like a bunch of minarets in the silhouette of the sky, where that's not really how Saudi Arabia skyline looks or Pakistan skyline looks, but having McDonald's arches and stuff like that just ruins the magic of what I'm trying to draw, right?
It kind of looks like the Istanbul skyline, but
maybe just one small segment of it.
Small segment of it, but you're still going to have lots of non-religious buildings.
Yeah.
So the first thing that for me would differentiate a book like yours from something that's Orientalist would be that you can do romantic, I think, imagery like that. But I think one of the key things for me, and I could be wrong, but would be, that it's written and created by you, who, you, as you've told me today, you grew up in Saudi Arabia, but you have Pakistani origins, and you were a Muslim, and you have family and friends and acquaintances that are Muslim. And so that's different. So it's not appropriative in the same way. If someone from within the culture, someone who celebrates Eid, who might do it in a secular way instead of a religious way, as you're pointing out in the book, that voice, your voice, and that would strike me as more, have more to say on these issues and more, authentic experiences with these issues. And so the other thing that sort of you wanted, that we had discussed a little bit to talk about, was this graphic novel Habibi.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a chance to look at it?
I did. And as everybody else who's reviewed this book, and I'm only recently getting into the whole graphic novel thing. And I actually can see that it's becoming more of an interest for me. So I'm glad you flagged this. But as every reviewer that looked at it, I agreed that it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's
like
stunning.
The drawings are just virtuosic, and they're breathtaking, and they stick with you. And it's just a haunting and beautiful book. But the author is not Arab. He's not Muslim, and he doesn't know Arabic, for example.
But he learned Arabic calligraphy just to make this book.
Right. So he learned calligraphy, and so he's trying his hardest. And I sort of sit on the fence with this book, because his whole goal was to have a kind of positive and rich and nuanced portrayal of sort of generically Muslim things for a non-Muslim audience. And he was really concerned with showing the similarities between sort of Christian and Muslim cultures, and showing the nuance in different people, and that these are real individuals. But he ran into trouble with some reviewers, because even though he kind of knew these things were Orientalist, whereas I don't think the people that did Aladdin even get it. So the fact that he gets it and is trying to sort of, in almost a tongue-in-cheek way, kind of deal with it, it still ends up being Orientalist. So he's copying a lot of his backgrounds from 19th century Orientalist paintings. And so
some just like generic geometric Islamic art too.
Right. So he's got, and if you've been, if I know you have, but anyone who's been to, a mosque, for example, will be familiar with, because, in Islam, you can't have, individuals represented in art. So you have various figurative patterns and things, and that shows up in Habibi. And so I just thought it was beautiful. I think some of the problems, you wonder, but is it being Orientalist? I mean, he tried his best. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I wonder. I think it's a beautiful book. I would recommend it to people. Mm-hmm. But I think you just do it with keeping these things in mind. I think you should, there was a New York Times review of the book that just sort of said, is kind of parroting or parodying Orientalism, does that end up itself being Orientalist? Like it's tough.
That's kind of the Simpsons defense too, right?
Right. And so I taught a few years ago a course on the ancient Greeks and the other. And I talked about different ways that the Greeks stereotyped, especially like Persians, but various other Scythians, Thracians, people that lived close to Greece but weren't Greeks. And they did similar things. They would have like one way to represent a Persian. So if someone was dressed like a Persian on a Greek vase, you could tell automatically that it was a Persian. It didn't matter that Persians in real life probably dressed in lots of different ways. It didn't matter that some groups that they portrayed as all the same and called by the same name actually didn't call themselves that, and were divided up into dozens of different language groups and things. So they had this Orientalizing trend where they would kind of undifferentiate non-Greeks into one kind of group. And so in that course, I there's some Greeks that seem to make fun of the Greek tendency to do that. There's some Greek comedies that are produced that show these ethnic stereotypes, but they do it in a kind of really absurd way that almost seems as much, in my reading of it, to be making fun of these stereotypes.
Oh, that's interesting.
As much as it's making fun of that ethnicity. And so I showed the class an example of what I was trying to talk about I showed a Flintstones clip from like the 60s, in which there was a Japanese stereotype in the cartoon, and it was just outrageous, right? It was a Japanese stereotype, and it had served no function other than to just make fun of Japanese people. And this is in a context that's only a decade or so removed from internment camps and all the other things, right? In World War II. And then I showed a clip from, and there's lots of, but I showed a clip from The Family Guy, which has lots of problems. But it's a clip about anti-Semitism, where the main character in The Family Guy wants to have a Jewish friend because that person will be good with money. And so it's this stereotype. But the whole point of that episode was to make fun of the main character for being such an ignorant buffoon that he actually holds those stereotypes about Jewish people. And so both showed... Kind of like
Borat, right?
Right, well, exactly. And so Borat's another example, I think, in this line. I mean, it might be bad. It might be wrong to do what Sacha Baron Cohen does in that. But at the same time, I mean, it's certainly aesthetically wrong in certain...
I went to the theater to see that with a Jewish friend, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what he's thinking right now, but he was laughing all the way through.
That's funny because I went with a guy from Kazakhstan.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
And did he find it offensive?
I mean, no, he thought it was great.
Oh, really? Because my Russian friends, I guess, whose parents and stuff have roots in Kazakhstan, and they found it to be pretty offensive, and that's the first time I really thought of it like that. And because my Jewish friend really liked it, and so then I saw how it works differently on two different levels, which I thought was
that's really interesting. And I know actually the people who were most offended by Borat were Romanians. Because his Kazakh village is actually in Romania, and these people were just kind of unwitting Romanian villagers that he was just making fun of. So, but I mean, I guess it gets to all those layers, but there are different ways to use ethnic stereotypes, and I think it's dangerous, and you've got to be very careful whenever you use them. But you can use them to make fun of the ethnicity and sort of perpetuate harmful images of the other, or you can use it to make fun and point out how ridiculous these stereotypes are. And sort of the latter can be, I think, useful for sparking conversation, even though you have to be cautious about it. And as you say about Borat, you still run the risk and should be careful with how it comes across to the people that you're supposedly not trying to humiliate. But it's a hard thing, and it's. I think at the end of the day, I think the thing that distinguishes something like Aladdin from something like Habibi is Habibi, the white, non-Arab, non-Muslim author of Habibi, did actually do as much due diligence, I think, as anyone really could in his position to, as you say, learn calligraphy and try to, whether he was successful or not, try to portray commonalities, try to portray a culture sympathetically to a wider Western, quote, audience that might not be sympathetic to that other culture. Whereas Aladdin is just, I mean, it's all white people making Aladdin. And it's just using what we already think about Arabs in the non-Arabic world. It's just using it for entertainment value. And so it's just the song itself at the very beginning. I mean, it has this classic "You're in the Middle East Now" tune.
But so here's my thing, right? I agree that the song is really terrible, cringeworthy, and they're not in the right place to make that kind of criticism. However, it's not entirely an inaccurate criticism of Sharia punishments.
No, I mean that. So what do you do about the fact that? Yeah. So
people in my position in Saudi Arabia cannot make those tongue-in-cheek jokes. So sometimes when we see an external person that has the freedom to do it, it's kind of like a relief, right? Like, oh, thank God, like someone is talking about this because this is horrible. I mean, Saudi Arabia has horrific punishments. This isn't something that
That's a great perspective. And, to be honest with you, I would not have thought of that if I hadn't talked to you today. That the idea that, so if you actually live in a society in which the kinds of punishments that are stereotyped in like the market scene in Aladdin, like the cutting off the hand for theft and that kind of thing, and whips and all, and chaining up in dungeons and all the stuff that happens in Aladdin. If you come from a culture where that's still, there are beheadings and things and whippings and all these things that we hear in the news all the time in Saudi Arabia, especially, but you're not allowed to critique them because you're in there, and you will, be punished for critiquing them. So there could be some value in someone who's free to do that, doing it now.
But this didn't seem to come entirely from a good faith, like, we're concerned about you kind of place. That's what I would say.
Yeah, they're not. I don't think that Disney was pushing for, criminal justice reform in Saudi Arabia, and also I don't think they were even concerned with the realities of 20th century Saudi Arabia, late 20th century, as more than here's stuff we read about in the Arabian Nights.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So even though it might mirror what actually happens, and for someone like you to watch it, maybe it had a different meaning. But the people that wrote the screenplay, I would imagine, I'd guess, I don't know them obviously, they're actually just getting it from, we've watched cartoons about, Aladdin and things like this before, and we've seen comic books and we've seen stories, and this is the kind of thing that people think should happen in a generic Arabic city.
Yeah, I agree. So it wasn't done as carefully and with as much good intent behind it as it could have been. And I think Habibi, even though some people may find it Orientalist, I think is absolutely brilliant. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And he seems to be honoring the culture. So I can't find fault with it, Like, I think he did such a good job, and he provided like this really rich resource about our culture in a way that people from within may or may not have the opportunity to do.
Yeah, and he didn't do what I would consider the cardinal sin of when you're talking about different cultures. He didn't do the kind of Dances with Wolves or Last Samurai thing, where you have the one white guy in the movie save everybody else.
Yeah, it's
so
amazing how common that is.
Yeah, he didn't get the Kevin Costner is a better Native American than the Native Americans in the film, and Tom Cruise is a better samurai than the Japanese samurai. So he didn't do that, which, again, the fact that you can actually humanize and make nuanced, genuinely Arabic characters. That's the other problem with Aladdin. What it does, as I tried to point out in my thread, is it makes Aladdin and Jasmine look basically just like slightly brown colored white people.
Yeah, and their accents too.
They have no accent. They speak just like like people from Los Angeles, and they they don't, other than Jasmine's kind of like midriff shirt, they don't really have anything kind of conventionally Arab about them, whereas everybody else in the film does.
That's not even like contemporarily, conventionally Arab. And there's a whole weird meshing of cultures that happens, that where anything in the East is sort of lumped in. There's like Indian element. She has a tiger called Raja.
But she's got a tiger. There's like snake charming going on.
Yeah, there's a guy with on a bed of nails.
Right. Yeah. And it's just anywhere that's like east of, Constantinople for the Europeans, Istanbul, of course, but is like in one place.
Right. And that happens even today. Like, my niece watches this cartoon called Shimmer and Shine. I don't know if you have kids or.
I do, but I don't know that they might watch it, actually. It sounds familiar.
They're like little genies, and they have this, they're very cute. I think they're adorable, but there's so many like Orientalist elements to it, right? There's like all these magical minarets, flying carpets, hookah pipes, and gems, and this jewelry that seems distinctly Indian to me. So I don't know what culture they're from. But that's something that's always bothered me, is that there's no regard for accurately portraying the Middle East or India. It's just a generic hodgepodge.
And from what like sort of little kind of I know of even just India, I mean, even, and the way that I've encountered, I had an Indian roommate in graduate school, but just talking about the wide variety of even regional, say, cuisines in India.
Yeah.
And so it's not, India itself, it's a billion people and one of the actually most ethnically and culturally diverse countries on earth.
Yeah.
And it's lumped in with generic Arabia and and North Africa, right? And so and that's again one of the hallmarks of Orientalism.
Right.
And I think what I was trying to bring out in this thread is the fact that there are shorthands, ways for people to kind of signal that they're drawing a certain culture. And that's what Disney does in Aladdin.
It's like lazy artistic representation.
It's just lazy. It's just
time.
Right. And people will do it, when you're not dealing with humans, it's less controversial.
Yeah.
And so I've seen people critiquing, the way, for example, dinosaurs are drawn in cartoons. And they're given like a sort of alligator belly and a dragging tail, which dinosaurs would not have had. But people are like, but this is what cartoonists draw dinosaurs to look like, so it doesn't matter that it's wrong. But it's much more problematic when you're, of course, dealing with actual groups of actual people, but you're being just as lazy and
marginalized cultures, right? Especially higher stakes.
That's especially it. I mean, so when you're dealing with a country like Canada or the United States that have, at this point, many decades of a legacy of intervention in places like, say, Palestine and Israel and Syria and so on, in Iraq. And so when you have that legacy and you're still coming up with policy that affects the real lives and safety of people in those kinds of countries, it becomes much more harmful when the people that are voting for these policies have this really caricatured and lazy idea of what kinds of people they're dealing with. And so it's, we can just assume that everybody is the same and we can just have a kind of unnuanced approach to it. And so I'm not convinced that things like Aladdin, but all those kinds of Orientalizing things have a real effect. And I mean, the reason I wrote that thread, too, was in response to that Serena Williams.
The cartoon.
Cartoon that and the artist knew that he wasn't just drawing someone throwing the tantrum, but the fact that you have decades or more than a century in the United States of minstrel shows.
Yeah, you got to see it in the wider context. These things don't happen in a vacuum.
And the fact that Serena Williams herself already takes a lot of heat for being too, quote, masculine and muscular. And you have these very negative stereotypes of the large, angry black woman.
Yeah, just full disclosure, any comment on the tennis part of it, I don't know, because I absolutely do not watch or know anything about tennis. But yeah.
Well, and again, she could have been wrong, and, she could have done the wrong thing. And, even if she wasn't treated, let's say, by the ref worse than male tennis players like people were claiming, even if that's not the case, you can't, it's your responsibility. The cartoon itself, yeah. Right. It's your responsibility as an artist not to be like, let's do something that's unmistakably tying into. Not only were these offensive to black people, but it helped perpetuate white supremacy over black people, because if you're white and you have a Jim Crow system or an unofficial Jim Crow system like election district gerrymandering in the U.S. and voter suppression, or cops killing people, it becomes much easier to not feel bad about that
Yeah.
if you actually think that people are more prone to kind of criminality or lack of control
And right now, people are sensitive. There's a guy who's sympathetic to all these alt-right types in the White House.
Yeah, right. This isn't just sort of your average context.
Right.
We're dealing with very real. We're dealing with Charlottesville. We're dealing with, all these things.
Honestly,
and it's
5 years ago, I would have said, look, racism has improved a lot, and let's not be nitpicky about these tiny little things. But right now, I can understand why people are frightened, why I'm frightened, because I've never seen this in my life. Like, here in Canada, of course, I've seen racism in Saudi Arabia, but that's another conversation. But and you were talking about real world effects. Like, public policy polling did a survey asking people if they would be okay bombing Agrabah, which is the fictional
which is Aladdin's
country.
city.
Yeah, Aladdin's fictional country. And 30% of Republican primary voters said that they supported bombing Agrabah.
Absolutely.
And even 19% of Democrats apparently said that they would be fine with it. So these are like the real world effects.
Right. And in Toronto, right now, when we're dealing with cartoons like the one of Serena Williams, we're dealing in a city that, people are, arguing about things that really affect overwhelmingly and disproportionately the Black community and the otherwise racialized community, things like karting and Tavis and all of these things that Toronto has. And so to perpetuate and to celebrate these negative stereotypes of, you say, Black people in a context when you're making real decisions that will affect the real lives and perceptions of people in those communities, it's a real thing that you have to address.
Yeah, and I just want to take this moment. I know I've made this point before, but also on the left, sometimes these lazy depictions have real world effects for women like me. Like in the election time leading up to Trump, that Shepard Fairey made that poster. It was a very powerful, iconic image of a woman in a U.S. flag hijab.
Right.
Which I understand what he's trying to do. I completely sympathize with the desire to, show solidarity with Muslims right now. And the easiest graphic way to do that is that, except that's a tool used to keep women in line in countries like Saudi Arabia. So I cannot help but look at it and feel like a pang of betrayal,
Well, there's no reason why we couldn't also consider that to be the same kind of artistic shorthand.
It is, exactly.
Right. And so it's, how do you say that this, what he was writing it, he drew it in order to, as you say, sort of rightly stand against Trump's talks of a Muslim ban and all these kinds of things and to show solidarity. But he did that by just reaching for kind of this very ready to hand and generalizing shorthand. That and as you bring out, there are very serious cultural and religious issues at play that affect people like you much more than they affect me, who can just feel good about myself if I retweet this picture because I want to signal that I'm against Trump's marginalizing of Muslims and in favor of immigration, even of people who are religiously Muslim, but without doing my job to take into account how that kind of imagery affects people that are different from me.
Right. Whereas I have a relative who makes her, 9-year-old wear it. And I know that the kid doesn't want to wear it. And she's never going to say that if asked, because they're taught to say that this is my choice. And you saw that in even the CBC documentary I was mentioning before, that they are actually taught to say, this is my choice, this is empowering. They can't honestly speak about it. So to use that as a symbol of empowerment, of solidarity, I'm like, but it doesn't express solidarity with most of the Muslims I know, because most of the Muslims I know are not hijabis.
Okay.
So, so I just want people to be conscious of that in terms of the conversation around Orientalism as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad, and we have to keep reminding ourselves, I do, is certainly that even though I would, of course, identify much more with the left than the right.
Me too.
But this is Orientalism and stereotyping and the use of lazy shorthand imagery like this is not a right or left.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could use like a T-shirt with a crescent and a star. I don't know, like a necklace with a crescent and a star, something to indicate that the person in the drawing is Muslim, but doesn't have to be the ultimate conservative garment, It doesn't have to be championing a certain form of Islam, right?
In a context in which these things are contested, and controversial.
Yes, exactly.
Right, but again, those are harder to come up with if you're a cartoonist.
I'm an illustrator too, and
right. Okay.
I know.
I'm not saying they shouldn't work at it.
Yeah, but you can if you're thoughtful. And I'm not saying that I have probably never done it, reached for like the easy way, because sometimes you need to make it painfully obvious for people to understand your cartoon or whatever point you're getting across. I get it, but if we all think a little bit harder, we can maybe make more nuanced points. Right? Islam is one of those topics right now where it's a hard thing to discuss, and it's hard, and those like me who are so concerned with kind of fighting back against increasing kind of white nationalist sentiment do run the risk and sometimes stumble on buying into stereotypes in their own ways, and I appreciate that your perspective on that, because it doesn't mean that just because white nationalists are the worst doesn't mean, and we can all agree on that, it doesn't mean that I get to sort of slack off on understanding the issues that I'm trying to appropriate. Right, and that means a lot to hear.
Yeah,
that's really good to hear, and it's like the reverse of that. Because ISIS is the worst, it doesn't mean that you get to slack off on white nationalists and other kinds of extremism that are happening around you.
Right. Well, it's always easier, of course, for everybody, to call out those things that are further away from you and require less work on your part.
Yeah.
So I can whine about, women's rights in other parts of the world if I'm, a Peterson fan, while ignoring my own role in standing against women's rights here, because it would require a change of behavior on my part.
Yeah.
And on the same token, it's easy for me to speak out against neo-Nazis because I'm not a neo-Nazi. But it's harder for me to call out people that are allied with me for when they do things that are appropriative or marginalizing, and it's even harder still for me to recognize it when I'm doing it. And it's a constant journey, and it's a constant an exercise in self-reflection, and I try to do it, and I sometimes fail, and I think if I want to encourage anyone to do anything, it's just always be mindful of those things and careful to examine how you're approaching things and whether or not you are doing it carefully and responsibly.
Mm-hmm. And just one thing before I let you go is I saw you mention that someone was criticizing your thread, saying that you criticizing Aladdin was similar to Peterson freaking out about Frozen.
Right.
So, I understand the difference between those things very well, but just for people in the audience, if you could explain how they're different and why it's important to understand that.
Yeah. So to be honest with you, for my own mental health, I haven't watched Peterson's rant against Frozen. I've received kind of the Twitter gist of it, that he's mad because it's removing the kind of traditional archetypical, as he's always into these archetypes, hero roles. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of an anti-masculinist, and women's lib kind of message that isn't only kind of eye-rolling because it's women's lib and anti-masculinist, but that it actually is harmful because it is telling men, especially, or boys, that they don't get to be the hero, all this kind of stuff. So that's why he was mad at Frozen. I was more mad at Frozen because I thought it was a terrible movie, but that's a different. I was like, there are better movies than this. I mean, Tangled's a better movie. Anyway, so the difference is I don't hate Aladdin, and if that came across in my thread, that's wrong. I mean, I watched it. My kids have watched it with me. I laugh at it. I think it's a very entertaining movie, but it does unmistakably have these elements, and I'm just trying to point them out. And I was only using it as an example to say, to comment on the Serena Williams comment, to say, here's what I mean by iconography and artistic shorthand, that there are ways to sort of cut corners, to show a certain, to put things in a certain context almost immediately. Whereas Peterson was just worried that Elsa and Anna saving the day themselves is, you don't get to be an archetype Jungian hero or this kind of thing. So I do think we have different approaches.
Yeah, he basically wants to save tradition in how these fairy tales are told, and you basically want us to self-reflect and sort of evolve as our values as a society and culture evolve.
Right, and thank you. I think that's probably the fundamental difference, that Peterson thinks we're losing something to the point of threatening the stability of society itself. Whereas I actually think by having more nuance and more discussions and more openness, like this conversation I've enjoyed with you today, that we're actually only adding things and gaining things that are valuable. And so that's the way I prefer to look at things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People think that, someone on the left will have this type of conversation. They want, they hate it. They want it eradicated. They're policing it. And it's like, no, it's right. Just that as we grow as a culture, we just notice things. That it's going to happen like 20 years down the line for what we're saying today, maybe. And that's right. Okay, because we cannot know how our values evolve in the future. That's okay to look back at things and be like, that was kind of, I'm pretty sure I've said problematic things and cringed about them later. You just learn. As you learn and grow, this is bound to happen. Friends, you look back at Friends sometimes like, oh my God. Doesn't mean that you're like, people should not watch Friends. Or even Jon Stewart had some bits that are like pretty transphobic and stuff. And
yeah, well, it was just everybody. I mean, when I was growing up, in high school, of course, called things gay.
Yeah, same. I think.
Or used like retarded and things like this. And instead of as growing as a person, you get to that point where you're like, we should talk about these things. And I don't hate myself for doing it, but it's part of growing up.
Yeah, and there's no harm in just self-reflecting, right?
Yeah.
So, I've really enjoyed this very rich and nuanced discussion. It was really fun to chat with you about this topic. I've had so many thoughts for so long on it.
Well, I'm so glad you invited me, and this has been a real pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on, and perhaps we'll chat again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.